to Study Room. This is your English tutor Nikita. So today we are at the chapter 9. We've done 8 chapters till now, 6 to 7 poems till now. And English is a very easy language if you understand the deep meaning. If you understand what author is actually trying to convey you. It's not always simple hi, hello. There's so much more to that hi, hello. There's a story behind it. There are personal incidents behind it. So today we are going to do this chapter 9, which is The Great Stone Face 1. Let's see about the author first. Nathaniel Hawthorne was an American romantic writer whose works focus a lot on morality. His most famous work is the novel The Scarlet Letter. So Nathaniel Hawthorne, born on 1804 and died on 1864, he's an American romantic writer and his works focuses a lot on morality. So morality is basically moral deeds. His most famous work is The Scarlet Letter. Scarlet. Very posh, right? Now the themes that we are going to cover in this story. So The Great Stone Face is a short story that plays on the idea of folklore and prophecy. So it's more on the history, it's more on traditions, it's more on culture, it's more on folklore. The major theme is to be humble because the author writes stories based on morality, as we see through Ernest's actions in comparison with the other 3 characters. So this humble character is got to know by 3 other characters and different characters as they unfold in the story. Now this story tackles the idea of how greatness is perceived, with the first great man being a wealthy merchant, the second great man being a military commander. What quality actually makes a person great? So through different people in different situations, one of them is a very wealthy merchant, one of them is a military commander. The author has tried to bring in the theme of humbleness and how greatness has been perceived. Now let's begin reading the story. One afternoon, when the sun was going down, a mother and her little boy sat at the door of their cottage talking about the great stone face. They had only to lift their eyes, and there it was, plain to be seen, though miles away, with the sunshine brightening all its features. So one afternoon, there's this mother and son who basically were sitting at their house door, and they were just looking at the great stone face. They didn't have to overlook it or they didn't have to see it forcefully. It was right straight to them. And now the author is describing that it is plain. So, there's no obstacle in seeing it. It's even miles away, but because it's at height and it's at so much width that you can see it. And maybe because it's an open land. And then he's saying that it's a sunshine brightening all its features. So the sunshine rays that is being sparkling on it is highlighting all the little features. And what was the great stone face? The great stone face was a work of nature, formed on the perpendicular side of a mountain by some immense rocks which had been thrown together so that when viewed at a proper distance, they resembled the features of a human face. So this great stone face is no normal stone or something. It's actually a creation of nature. As the mountain had landslides and everything, the mountains through their rocks formed a structure which actually looked like a face. If the spectator approached too near, he lost the outline of the enormous face and could see only a heap of gigantic rocks piled one upon another. But seen from a distance, the clouds clustering about it, the great stone face seemed positively to be alive. So if you see it from the far, you will actually see a human face and you will recognize. But then as the moment you start going near that great stone face, you will just notice that this heap of rocks. It's not really a face, it's just the structure is like that seen from far. And this says that it's positively to be alive, that the clouds, the sun make it look like a lively human being. It was the belief of many people that the valley owed much of its fertility to the benign face that was continually beaming over it. A mother and a little boy, as we said earlier, sat at the door of their cottage, gazing at the great stone face and talking about it. The child's name was Ernest. So, a lot of people believe that because of the valley and the fertility that is growing in the agriculture, the face has actually started showing upon it. But then, so this is what stone face is all about. This is what the description of it is given. It's actually a heap of rocks from a mountain. When seen from a distance, looks like a human being, but really doesn't have such face. So this mother and little boy, whose name is Ernest, the boy's name is Ernest, were sitting at their door and was actually talking and looking at the stone face. Mother, said he, who? Ernest said this, while the great face smiled on him. I wish that it could speak, for it looks so very kindly that its voice must indeed be pleasant. If I ever see a man with such a face, I should love him very much. So this boy, because he's young, so you can see how the childhood nature is, we always wish fantastical things. Oh, this should talk, this should cry, this is like this. We start dreaming, and imagination is at our biggest peak. So he's saying that I wish that this big face or stone face could actually talk, because it looks so lively that his voice will be so pleasant and so good to hear. I will always love a person who has such a face. Then it says, if an old prophecy should come to pass, answered his mother, we may see a man sometime with exactly such a face as that. So then this mother goes all religious and spiritual and says that if some big reason, or if something comes true, if the spiritual gods believe in it, this may actually happen, that somebody looking like this may come in front of you. And then Ernest asks, what prophecy do you mean, dear mother? Please tell me about it. The curiosity of a child, that you cannot leave the topic here. Tell me what prophecy. So his mother told him a story that her own mother had told her when she herself was younger than little Ernest, that at some future day a child should be born near here who was destined to become the greatest and noblest person of his time, and whose face in manhood should bear an exact resemblance to the great stone face. So the story that the mother's mother has been passing on is the same story that she tells to Ernest, and she says that if a child who's born near and here of this stone face actually is so noble and so kind, he will have the resemblance, he or she will have the resemblance to the great stone face. Many still had faith in this old prophecy, but others took it to nothing but idle talk. So someone who actually believed in faith, in hope, believed in this, but for others it's just gossip. At all events, the great man of the prophecy had not yet appeared. And then the mother says, but till now nobody of this face has actually come. And he says, oh mother, cried Ernest, clapping his hands, I do hope that I shall live to see him. So he says that I hope that I live so many years that I actually see the person who has the same face. His mother was an affectionate and thoughtful woman. It was proper, she thought, not to discourage the fanciful hopes of a little boy. So she said to him, perhaps you may. So the mother was very kind and told the child, yeah, you will, don't worry. And Ernest never forgot the story that his mother told him. It was always in his mind whenever he looked upon the great stone face. So this story always stayed with him. He knew, he always believed into this. He always saw the great stone face and believed that something like this would happen. He spent his childhood in the log cottage where he was born, was dutiful to his mother and helpful to her in many things, assisting her much with his little hands and more with his loving heart. In this manner, from a happy yet often pensive child, he grew up to be a mild and quiet youth. So this guy Ernest actually grew now, and so they're trying to describe his personality, the changes that happened with him over the years. So his childhood was logical, but he helped his mother, was very caring, was very humble. He used to help his mother, always have a caring heart, and this child turned to be a mild and quiet youth. Ernest had no teacher, but the great stone face became one to him. When the work of the day was over, he would gaze at it for hours, until he began to imagine that those vast features recognized him and gave him a smile of kindness and encouragement. So he didn't have any teacher like you have, okay? He didn't have nobody to teach him or teach the basics, but all he looked was at the great stone face, which inspired him to be kind, encouraged him, gave him the vibe. About this time, there went a rumor throughout the valley that the great man who was to bear a resemblance to the great stone face had appeared at last. It seems that many years before, a young man had left the valley and settled at a distant sea airport. So now during this time when Ernest was actually growing and he became a youth, the rumor spread through the valley. So valley is the area, the village that they live. So the rumor spread that the man who actually has the face like great stone face had finally appeared. Gather Gold, which was his name, had set up as a shopkeeper and being sharp in business matters, had become so very rich that it would have taken him 100 years only to count his wealth. In time he thought of his native valley and decided to go back there and end his days where he had been born. So the guy who actually had a resembling face was Gather Gold. He was a businessman who earned so much money that even 100 years if he could live, or his generation, they couldn't count the money. And because now he was getting old and everything, he decided to go back to his valley to spend his days. Ernest had been deeply stirred by the idea that the great noble man, the man of prophecy, after so many ages of display, was at length to be seen in his native valley. So he says, Ernest is basically very curious to meet him, and he's stirred by the idea that the man that I've actually been dreaming from childhood, the prophecy that I've been hearing, is finally here. While the boy was still gazing up the valley one day and imagining that the great stone face returned his gaze, the noise of wheels was heard and a crowd of people cried, "Here comes the great Mr. Gather." So one day when he was just gazing and doing his normal casual work, he heard cheering saying that Mr. Gather Gold is here in the valley. A carriage drawn by 4 horses, so this shows the richness and the money that he had, dashed around the turn of the road. Within it, thrust partly out of the window, appeared the face of an old man with yellow skin. "The very image of the great stone first," shouted the people. "Sure enough, the old prophecy is true. Here we have the great man at last." So people were seeing his face and shouting, "Here is the man who has a resemblance to great stone face. The prophecy has come true. He's the great man," and everything. And what greatly puzzled Ernest, they seemed actually to believe that here was the likeness which they spoke of. He turned away sadly from the wrinkled shrewdness of that unpleasant face and gazed up the valley, where the stone face seemed to say, "He will come, fear not, Ernest, the man will come." So the key words, perpendicular is rising very steeply. You have heard in maths also perpendicular shape. Clustering is gathering. Immense, enormous or gigantic is huge. Benign is kind or gentle. Prophecy is a statement that tells what will happen in the future. Pensive is thoughtful. Stirred is moved. Continuing the story. The years went on and Ernest grew to be a young man. He attracted little notice from the inhabitants. They saw nothing remarkable in his way of life, except that when the labor of the day was over, he still loved to gaze upon the great stone face. Their idea was that this was a folly, but pardonable because Ernest was industrious, kind, and neighborly. They did not know that the great stone face had become a teacher to him, and that the sentiment which was expressed in it would enlarge the young man's heart and fill it with deeper sympathies than other heart. So the people, now he's young, so the people start talking about him, how he's such a kind man, and nobody actually knew that this great stone face meant so much to him. There were so many sentiments and emotions attached. They did not know that from this would come a better wisdom than could be learned from books. So people didn't know that this one stone heap could actually teach a person so much more than what books and teachers could actually teach you. Neither did Ernest know that the thoughts which came to him so naturally in the fields and at the fireside were of a higher tone than those which all men shared with him. So even the person Ernest himself couldn't realize that he was so different, and he knew everything which all of them were reading from the book so naturally. A simple soul, simple as when his mother first told him the old story, he beheld the marvelous face looking down the valley and still wondered why its human likeness was so long in coming. He himself could question sometimes that why is this happening with me? By this time, poor Mr. Gathergold, who was actually resembled, was dead and buried. His wealth, which was the body and spirit, had disappeared before his death. Since the melting away of his gold, it had been generally agreed that there was no great likeness after all between the ruined merchant and the majestic face upon the mountain. So his gold and his money, as they went away, people started saying that no, there is no matching between the stone and the face. It so happened that another son of the valley had become a soldier many years before. After a deal of hard fighting, he was now a famous commander. So the first we read about the man, the merchant, now it's the soldier. He was known on the battlefield by the name of Blood and Thunder because of his warriorship, because of his power. Old and tired now, he had lately expressed a desire to return to his native valley. The inhabitants, his old neighbors and their grown-up children, prepared to welcome the renowned commander. It was being said that at last the likeness of the great stone face had actually appeared. So now people start saying that this commander who left his village to join the army, trained everything, did wars, and is now coming back with so much battle, so much power and so much this, is the person who is resembling the great stone face. Great therefore was the excitement throughout the valley. And many people who had never once thought of glancing now spent much time in gazing at it for the sake of knowing exactly how General Blood and Thunder looked. So the people who never looked at Stoneface also now started seeing it because they wanted to know whether he could actually resemble or not. On the day of the general's arrival, Ernest and all the other people of the valley left their work and proceeded to the spot where a great banquet had been prepared. So all these people, when the commander came, so the first he came on chariots and horses. Now when he's coming, there's this whole banquet hall booked and food and everything, a feast. Soldiers stood on guards, flags waved and the crowd roared. This is because they are honoring him. Ernest was standing too far back to see Blood and Thunder's face. However, he could hear several voices. "It's the same face exactly," cried one man, dancing for joy. "Wonderfully like it, that's a fact." So the same thing which they did for Merchant, they were re-repeating it. "And why not? He's the greatest man of this or any other age, beyond a doubt." Now people are like, undoubtedly, he's the greatest man. Ernest at last could see the general's face, and in the same glance, he could also see the great stone face. If there was such a likeliness as the crowd proclaimed, Ernest could not recognize it. "Fear not, Ernest," as if the greater. "Fear not, Ernest, he will come." And again, like how he felt during Merchant, he didn't feel that this man resembled it, and his inner soul said, "Fear not, the real man who will resemble me will come." The key words: inhabitants are people living in a place. Sympathies, feelings of sorrow, approval, like you sympathize somebody. Labor is work, beheld is saw, renowned is famous, banquet is feast, proclaimed is announced. Right, now let's discuss questions. Write true or false against each of the following statements. The great stone face stood where Ernest and his mother lived? No, it didn't stood near, but they could see it. It was far. One could clearly distinguish the features only from a distance? Yes, because as you go near, it's just rocks. Ernest loved his mother and helped her now? Yes, true. Though not very rich, Gathergold was a skill. He was very, very rich. Gathergold died in poverty and neglect? Yes. The great stone face seemed to suggest that Ernest should not fear the general? Yes. The questions. What was the great stone face? So the great stone face, as described in the first paragraph of the story, when the mother and son were gazing at it, it was basically a heap of rocks from the mountain in perpendicular shape that looked like a human face. What did young Ernest wish when he gets that he meets, that prophecy comes true, and he meets such a noble and person who actually resembles the great stone face? What was the story attributed to the stone face? That, somebody as near would be born here in the valley, and he would be so noble and humble that he would have the face resembling. Who gave up the people of the valley the idea that the prophecy was about to come true for the first time when this Gathergold was coming? Did Ernest see in Gathergold the likeness? No. Who did he confide in, and how has he proved right? So who did he confide in? His inner soul, which said, "Fear not." And how was he proved right? When he died, people said, "No, he didn't resemble." What made people believe General Blood and Thunder was him? Because they thought he's born from the valley, he's a commander, he's done such noble tasks, and so he's coming and he must resemble. Ernest compared the man's work. What did he conclude? That this man also does not resemble. So before we move, here's a quick revision of the story that we read today. A mother and son, which is Ernest and his mother, were sitting and watching a mountain formation known as the Great Stone Face, whose features resemble like an actual human face. The boy named Ernest wishes that the stone face could actually be a person. He could speak because his voice would be so pleasant, and the prophecy. Ernest hopes that he gets to see the man so that the prophecy comes true and he sees the man who resembles the Great Stone Face. Ernest remembers the story his whole life. In fact, he gazes for guidance every day and considers it as his teacher. A rumor spreads in the valley that the man named Gather Gold, who is a merchant, resembles, and Ernest is also helpful of this great man. So he's seeing the old man, but he notices there is no resemblance. Years later, people come to hear of another son of the valley who resemble, and it's a soldier. Blood and Thunder is what the army people have given him the name. The commander returns to the valley in his old age and is welcomed through a banquet and everything. When Ernest catches a glimpse, he knows that this commander also doesn't look like the Rock. Ernest is certain the real man would come later. He feels a voice in his head telling him not to worry. The day will come when he gets to see the real stone face. So this is the story. So this story taught us how when you are noble and actually modest, you kind of don't feel that a person who has done anything is more noble. Okay. So like Ernest, through three people, right? The three characters were who? Ernest, the Gather Gold, and the commander. So Ernest has become a loving man because seeing the stone mountain, he actually wants to be kind. He teaches him so much, and they both share a bond. So that when he receives, he does not see the face structure. He's trying to see a man through their features, through their characteristics, and he does not get resembled. So this story is about how humility, how being humanity, how being modest is very important, how kindness is a factor, and how a stone face can actually teach a person how to be noble and have a happy life. So this is it for today. See you in another chapter. Bye bye.